Hey everyone, welcome to Perkstream for November 3rd, 2021. Let's hear what God has to say to Elijah. Well, hey there, I want to welcome you back to Perkstream. Thanks for joining me here today as we talk a little bit more about the life of Elijah and what we can learn from this great man of God who went through a really difficult time. We've been walking through his story, realizing that, as James put it to us, that there's something very important about this giant of faith that we've talked about, and that is this. Elijah was a man just like us. He was a human being just like us. And this means that he was subject to the same highs and the same lows that everyone else is. In other words, there's no difference between him and you and me. We all can kind of get into a valley at some point. And sometimes that valley is a lot lower than we've ever experienced before. And Elijah knew that. See, we look at Elijah, and as we followed him last week, we realized that he had some really high highs, including calling fire down from heaven and then having the people turn back to God. But then the low came when Jezebel, the queen, a worshiper of Baal, had nothing in common with Elijah. In fact, saw her losing ground to Elijah and basically promised that he would be dead just like her prophets. And for this reason, we follow Elijah from Mount Carmel in the north of Israel, all the way through Israel, all the way through Judah, down, down, down into the desert of Sinai. And down there in Sinai, Elijah basically says, God, take me out. I'm no better than my fathers. I'm no better than those who went before me. Well, that was not in God's plan. And so he fed Elijah and sent him on. And Elijah continued to go down even more. And he finally came to the Mount of God, Mount Sinai, the place where God spoke to Moses and gave the people of God the Ten Commandments. Well, when he gets there and he's on the mountain, God comes down to him and says, Elijah, what are you doing here? And Elijah had his speech rehearsed. He gives it to God that he feels alone. He feels isolated. He feels like he's done everything he can to be faithful to the work of the Lord, and yet the people have not responded. In fact, it's left him in a place where they want him dead. Elijah really believes that the people, not just Jezebel, want him dead because they've taken everybody else's life. They've taken all the other faithful people's lives. Why shouldn't he be dead too? So here's what God does. God says, I want you to go out on the mountain because I'm coming by. I'm going to pass by you. And I don't know what Elijah might have been inspecting in that moment, but he steps out on the mountain, and the next thing he knows, he is in the midst of some terrible acts of nature. He is being challenged by an earthquake, and he's challenged by hurricane winds, and he's challenged by fire falling on the mountain. And all of this happened because the Lord was passing by. But God wasn't in any of the elements. It isn't until all of that stuff fades away and there's silence on the mountain that Elijah hears a still small voice saying, what are you doing here, Elijah? God's voice didn't come in the dramatic, even though that's sometimes what we want. God's voice is still, and it was resonating around the hill, and sometimes it's resonating around us in ways that we are not hearing. I think we can relate in part to Elijah's woes, his down feeling, because we have sometimes felt like we're doing the best we can. Sometimes we feel like we've even gone above and beyond, and yet nothing is working, nothing is changing, nothing seems to help. And quite frankly, God, why am I doing all this? I'm really not any better than anybody else. I'm not any better. And maybe that's also part of the point, that we have to sometimes come to the end of ourself before we can really hear what is up with God, if in fact we're willing to hear what God has to say. And this is really kind of the question is, does God have access to our ears? Are we in a place where we can hear God? Now that idea of does God have access to us is not my original thought. I got to hear it today in a group meeting with other pastors as we were asking this question, does God have access to us, or are we too busy working our own routine? And sometimes when we're working our own routine and we're digging in and things aren't working the way we want them to, we're frustrated, we're depressed, we're like, it's no use. And the question is, in that moment, does God have access to our ears to be able to ask us in his still small voice, what are you doing here? You know, God could have taken out Elijah. In fact, in some ways, I would have to agree with Pastor Jonathan, who has inspired this series, when he says, when Elijah was out on the mountain and there was hurricane winds and an earthquake and fire, God in some ways was saying to Elijah, I could take you out, but I'm not going to. I'm not going to answer that prayer for you, Elijah, because I have something yet that I want you to do. But my first question is, can I have access to you? Can I have access to your ears? Can I have access to your heart? Even though it's dark, Elijah, even though you can't see the hand in front of your face, Elijah, can I speak to you? And can I guide you out with a very small amount of light? I don't need much. I just need you to be willing to follow me and to follow my lead. So here's the question. Are you able to stop and listen to the voice of God? Can you hear it in the darkness? And are you rehearsing how bad it is for yourself? Are you taking time simply to give God your speech, or are you willing to stop and say, speak, Lord, your servant is listening. Speak, God, because I want to hear what you have to say. I'm learning to do this even now. It's been 5 weeks since I suffered that assault, and I've been having good days, I've been having bad days, and the bad days seem to come in, and when they come in and they get their grab hooks in, and I sit there and go, I want to stop thinking about this, but I can't. And it's taking up a lot of headspace, and it's taking up a lot of time. God, what's going on here? I think I'm trying to hear God in that at the same time. A question that he asks when those thoughts start coming in, when they start kind of flowing in and they try to take over, God says, what are you doing here? I know I don't want to stay there, and I know I need God to guide me out, and he's going to give me just enough light to go in the direction he wants me to go. So next week we're going to hear a little bit of where that direction was for Elijah and what that means for us. Because the good news is God doesn't want us to stay where we are, but before we can move on to where God wants to take us, we have to answer the question, what are we doing here? And can we hear the voice of God? Does God have access to our ears? So my hope for you today is that you will let God take you into his still and quiet presence. He doesn't want to take you out. He wants to take you in to his merciful and wise arms where he can say, I love you, I have a plan for you, but I need you to hear me and I need you to trust me. And those are words that I'm still continuing to process in my life, and I will hope that you process them for yours as well. I pray you will let his words give you space to heal. I pray that your ears will hear that still small voice and direct you to the light, even if that light seems so small. And may you find yourself taken in a direction to a time and a place where God is going to do his best work yet.